In Trinidad and Tobago, if you're looking for corruption, generally speaking, one of the main areas to look is contracts. Contracting is the highway for corruption in Trinidad and Tobago. And I don't suppose only in Trinidad and Tobago. I suppose it may be a general rule in many places, because a contract is the contractor calls a number how much he determines this thing is going to cost for him to do, and the owner or the person who's hiring the contractor just pays them that number. That number could change pretty easily. It's not necessarily a easily scientific way to find the number that the contractors call. So very often when you hear about corruption in Trinidad and Tobago, it's often around contracting and contractors. Recently, the Tobago side of our government, the THA, was talking about a new plan they had on how they were going to execute their major projects over there in Tobago. They don't have enough money to easily do everything they want in 1 year. So what they're going to do is allow the contractors to privately finance those contracts, and eventually they would pay back the contractors. Now, I heard some people talk about the danger of this and that. They don't think it sounds all that good of a plan, because it might be that the government wouldn't pay you. How do you know you're going to do this contract and eventually they will pay you? But here's the thing, it's the government. The government could be said to be a bit like the Lannisters, if you want to go into that Game of Thrones lore, where they kind of always pay their debts to a certain extent. It might take a long time, but it's easier, I think, to try to force the government to pay you. That's why those large contractors still do it. They will run in there and take a dangerous, sketchy contract once it's from the government, because they know 20 years down the road, even if they could still sue. And well, it's not exactly 20 years, but nearly half, around 10 years, these contractors in this story that we're going to look into, this news article that we're going to look into, have been suing the government, looking to get their money. And it seems like it's finally heading down a positive line for them. And we're going to look at this and see some of the workings of contracting with the government, and how it is that many people could still run into these things, even with sketchy deals like they have planned over there in Tobago. Contractors win round 1 in lawsuit for unpaid work. A group of contractors have partially succeeded in their lawsuit over almost $100 million in infrastructure work they allegedly performed for an unemployment relief program project of the Ministry of Food Production. Junior Fabian Creighton, Cleophas Alexander Orr and Associates K&D Holdings Limited, Revs Mechanical and Engineering Services, JDR Construction Limited, Hippolyte General Contractors Limited, and RNS Voodoo Equipment Rental and Transport Limited sued the Office of the Attorney General, after they allegedly completed the drainage works at various locations in Trinidad in mid-2013 and were not paid. That is 10 years ago, in case anyone is struggling a bit with the math there. That is 10 years ago from the current date, mid-2013. In defense of the lawsuit, the state's legal team claimed that the companies were not requested or contracted to do the claimed work. It is also claimed that the officials of the ministry who allegedly requested the work from the contractors were not authorized to do so based on procurement rules and regulations. So the government is claiming, the state is claiming, the Attorney General is claiming that the contract wasn't given out above board. There were people involved there who did give them the contract. It seems like they're saying nearly two things to some extent there. They were saying that they weren't really hired to do those contracts. It's nearly like the state is saying they ran in there and randomly did the contracts. But they're also saying that the people who did procure them to do those contracts, who did contract them to do the work, those people were not authorized to do so. I think you can't claim the two necessarily. You can't say that the companies were not requested or contracted, and then say that the requests for the contractors were not authorized. You could say that it's not authorized, but to say that it wasn't requested might be untrue based on at least that second claim, because you're saying that yes, they were they were requested, but the request wasn't coming from the right channels. That's fine, that's understandable, but there was a request sent out. The people didn't just run out there and randomly start to do work on the drain. Delivering a 201-page judgment late last week, High Court Judge Devendra Rampersad ruled that the contractors were unable to prove that there were effective contracts for the work. The court's finding is that the defendant has been successful in proving that the process for formulating a contract with the state under the Central Tenders Board Act was not established, and the parties that engaged the services with the claimants did not have the necessary authority to formulate or grant such contracts, the judge said. So the judge agreed with the defense there. The judge agreed with the state, at least in that point. The people who gave out the contracts did not have the right authority to do so. However, he ruled that some of them should be still paid a reasonable sum for what services they did perform based on the legal principle of quantum meruit, as the state would have benefited from the work. The principle allows for the payment of a reasonable sum for services in the absence of a binding contract between parties. The contractors could not benefit from the assessment of the reasonable sums, which is to be done by a quality surveyor selected by the parties at a later date, as they maintained that they would only accept the fees claimed in the lawsuit. So some of the contractors in the lawsuit there, they were saying that they would only accept the fees that they were suing for. And if you're only accepting those fees, that's not the fee, that's not the payment that the court is issuing. The court is saying, we're going to get quantity surveyors, they're going to go out there and look at the work, and they will determine the value of that work, and they will still pay for that work. I like that principle in law. Who benefits? The person who benefits from this still is supposed to pay from it. You're not going to tell me that you got the contractors to do some work and the state isn't going to pay them at all. That really doesn't seem to be justice in the eyes of the law. If the state did actually get the drains done, it's not like they're lying about doing the drainage works. They did actually do the drainage works. If they can go out there and prove these were the box drains we built, well, then a quantity surveyor goes, checks it, okay, it's this long, 100 feet, it's made from these materials, we can calculate that, the average cost for labor back in 2013, etc., etc., etc. The amount that the state would owe you is calculate that X. And that makes sense to me. I can't be angry with that, because it's not like they're going to sue the state and just get some random money for nothing. They're suing the state for monies that they worked for. That seems fair to me. It seems unfair from the state side to attempt to give the contractors no money for work that they did. Rampersad also noted that the contract process between the parties was wrapped in a web of bureaucracy. The contractors were all contacted and were verbally told what they had to do, and what they had to do was emergency work, Rampersad said. I think this shows us not only a peek into government business, how government runs business, it also gives us a peek into the partnership era, because the partnership era in Trinidad and Tobago, 2010 to 2015, was the era of contracts galore. Contractors made a killing in that kind of time. That time period was the heyday of contracts in Trinidad and Tobago. The allegations of corruption are mind-blowing and whistling at the same time during that era. And this is how some of this contract work was given out. A call made, hey, you have so and so to do, and it's emergency work. As a result, they said that they did the work, but there were no records maintained by the relevant ministry that were produced in court, he added. So they did the work, but there weren't any records in the ministry of the work. The judge criticized the state for forcing the contractors to prove the existence of a contractual relationship. If the defendant failed to secure its records properly, the claimant companies ought not to be penalized for that. But that seems to be what went on, he said. And this is something that you could tell. Okay, they built 300 feet of box drain in the Piaco district. Can you go out to Piaco and show that box drain? Yes, the companies can. They can show you the box drain they built. They have a record of payments they made during that time in their company register. So why is there no record in the government? Why is there no record in the ministry? Because the work obviously was done, so there should be some kind of record of it. Where did the record go? And it cannot be that the state loses the record, misplaces the record. We know how the state is with files these days. The state is really skilled at misplacing these files as convenient. It cannot be that the state was at fault in misplacing these files, losing these files, and then because the state had a problem with that, you penalize the contractors and you don't pay them for that. So wait, all I need to do to not pay a contractor is lose the contract? That doesn't make sense. That wouldn't be a right picture of justice in our legal system if someone was capable of doing that. Worse yet, the state, one gets the impression, the judge went on, the judge is speaking here, one gets the impression that there was something more in it. Though that was never revealed, he added. And I could get that impression too. I understand what the judge is saying. The amount of bureaucracy here, the hearsay, the he say, she say, the lack of written records here, the fact that the work was done, so that's another part in it. It seems like there was something more in this whole issue that now we just don't have a record of. In his judgment, Rampersad raised concerns with reports from the Internal Audit Unit of the Ministry of Works and Infrastructure and the Ministry of Finance Central Audit Committee on the work which he described as flawed and skewed. Dealing with the Ministry of Works report, Rampersad said no real attempt was made to communicate with the contractors, and the shroud of fraud and deception seemed to have clouded their judgment. Referring to the Central Audit Committee report, Justice Rampersad noted that it was limited by constraints including delay between the completion of the work and the audit and the remote location of some of the work. To this court, the last constraint was an absolute stunner. The unit was being called upon to conduct an exercise without appropriate tools or trained personnel. So there were two main audits into this work, he was saying. There was the internal audit of the Ministry of Works and Infrastructure, and there was a Ministry of Finance Central Audit Committee that went out there to do the work. And he was saying that both of those audits were not good. They were flawed and skewed. One of them, he said, the Ministry of Works audit, they made no real attempt to communicate with the contractors. And the fact that there was a shroud of fraud and deception on the entirety of the contract, the judge is saying may have seemed to cloud the judgment of the auditors at the Ministry of Works. So they had this is what I'm gathering from the limited amount that the judge said on it. They seem to have had a view that there was fraud and corruption inside of this whole thing. They didn't even contact the contractors to really get a firm handle on what went on, and because of that, the audit didn't actually run properly. The second one by the Central Audit Committee inside of the Ministry of Finance, they're saying that they weren't even really able to go out there and properly investigate. They didn't have the rightly trained and qualified people to do such an audit in the first place. That's what the judge is saying. As part of his decision, the judge gave the parties until March 6th to appoint the surveyor whose report would be considered by him in determining the appropriate compensation. So the parties involved have until March 6th to appoint a surveyor that the judge would be okay with, and then from that, I suppose they would be able to get a ruling on the amount of money that they are due. To me, I don't have a problem with that kind of ruling where you say we're going to appoint someone to go and survey the level of work done, and that surveyor is going to decide, okay, this level of work is worth this amount of money. That kind of makes sense to me. The thing we're seeing here, though, is an answer to some of the questions about what is going to go on in Tobago, with the contractors having to pay for the work privately, and then the government will pay them back in time. I think we may see quite a bit of this coming out of Tobago in the coming years. Bear in mind, the alleged work done was done in 2013. The PNM government under Dr. Keith Rowley came into power in 2015. They were not around during the time when this alleged contract work was given out and done. So it's not even this government who did the work, but they're still having to deal with it because that's the nature of the continuity of governance. I think the same may be coming for the Tobago House of Assembly too. if this current THA, the independent THA that is in power right now, gives out so many contracts where the contractors pay with their own private money, that may be falling on some future THAs to face quite a few lawsuits, because the contractors that do such things aren't going to be small contractors. They're going to be contractors that are capable of hiring lawyers, skilled, experienced lawyers, to go out and get their money, go find their money. And we're seeing that 10 years down the road, there's still the reasonable possibility that these contractors can get the money from the state. Now, maybe the contract for these box drains, if we were to be able to go back in time, the contracts for these drainage maybe were unnecessary. Maybe they were corrupt from the very beginning. But if the government did give out that contract, the people did do work, there's always going to be a lawsuit. They are going to get the money that is due to them. They should get the money that is due to them. It's not on the... I don't want the government really and truly to stop them from getting the money, even though it may have had some less than above board dealings in there. If work was done, maybe the people should be paid for the work done. The problem is giving out the contracts in the first place. And that's why I would say Tobago and the THA is in the position where they should probably pause and take a good, hard, long think about what may be the future ramifications of how they plan and intend to execute some of their big contracts. All right, that's all I have for now. Tell me what you think. Do you think that they should indeed get that money, or do you think the government should stop them from doing it? Tell me what you think. That's all I have for now. I hope you're educated, informed, or entertained. Be sure to tune in for the Mindful live sessions every weeknight around that 9:30 p.m. time, and I will see you again in the next video. Later.